Miami is loud in the daytime. Sirens, traffic, the constant hum of air conditioners fighting the heat. But every so often, late at night, the city exhales. The streets empty out. The neon from Ocean Drive smears across wet asphalt, and the sound of the ocean feels just a little closer than it really is. On those nights, Dexter Morgan drives home, headlights cutting through the humidity, plastic sheeting still ghosting the back of his mind, the echo of a begging voice already fading as the tires roll past sleeping houses and darkened strip malls. Somewhere, a body is sinking beneath black water. Somewhere, evidence is dissolving in the current. And above it all, Miami sleeps through a monster it thinks it knows. Because by day, this is the story of a man who walks into Miami Metro homicide with coffee and a careful smile. Dexter jokes with Vince, reassures Deb, nods respectfully to Lagerta. He is the dependable blood spatter analyst, the quiet one in the corner who turns chaos into red lines and angles on a screen. Every report is precise, every conclusion reasonable, every gesture designed to say, "You can trust me." And every single night, he goes home, opens a wooden box filled with glass slides, and remembers the people he has killed. That double life is the central illusion of the series. The idea that you can live in a building full of detectives, stand over corpses with them, share takeout at 2 a.m., and still hide the fact that you are the reason so many bodies are turning up in the first place. On paper, it should be impossible. When you lay them all out together, every close call, every near miss, every moment the mask almost slipped, you start to see how fragile Dexter's routine really is. But from the very beginning, there is one discordant note in that carefully tuned world. One pair of eyes that never quite softens. Sergeant James Doakes does not laugh at Dexter's jokes. He does not take the donuts. He does not buy the act. Where everyone else at Miami Metro sees a helpful technician, Doakes sees something else entirely. A stillness that doesn't belong. A predator's focus hiding behind mild small talk. Special Forces, used to reading danger in the tiniest behavioral tells, he walks past Dexter and the pilot, and his whole body tightens. No evidence, no profile, just pure instinct telling him that this man is wrong. And that is our starting point tonight. We are going to move slowly through the seasons, through every line of dialogue and every sideways glance where that instinct sharpens into certainty. Let's settle in, get comfortable, and treat this like a long nocturnal stakeout. The city quiet, the lights low, and Doakes already watching from the shadows, long before anyone else even thinks to be afraid. Because Doakes didn't grow suspicious over time, he knew from day one. The rest of the story is just him proving it, moment by moment. This is why that first suspicious look matters. Because for Dexter Morgan, survival is not just about plastic wrap and knives. It is about office lighting, shared coffee, and the quiet routines of Miami Metro homicide. His entire life is built on the idea that the safest place for a predator to live is inside the herd that hunts predators. By day, he processes blood, writes neat reports, and turns horror into data. By night, he follows his own code. And the bridge between those two worlds is his job. Dexter depends on proximity to law enforcement to stay ahead of them. He reads case files before anyone else, anticipates which bodies will be found, and adjusts his kills so they never quite intersect with an active investigation. The lab is not just where he works. It is his early warning system, his camouflage, and his alibi. When you lay them all out together, every moment he jokes with Masuka, every time he brings donuts, every easy smile at a crime scene. You start to see how improbable this arrangement really is. An emotionless killer sitting in the middle of a homicide unit for years, and not one trained detective manages to connect the dots? On paper, that strains belief. The series knows this, so it quietly answers the objection by giving us Doakes, a man whose very first instinct is to say out loud what the premise tries to hide. Doakes is the correction to the fantasy. His immediate hostility is the show's way of admitting that someone in that building would feel it, even if they could not prove it. When he calls Dexter creepy in the pilot, it is more than workplace friction. It is the narrative acknowledging the audience's own unease. Because the truth is, people did notice Dexter. Repeatedly, Rita's doubts. Paul's accusations, LaGuardia's suspicions in the Bay Harbor Butcher case, all of them are little flashes of recognition. Doakes is simply the one who never looks away. In that sense, he becomes our stand-in. Every time Dexter smiles a little too easily over a dismembered body, every time he lingers a little too long at a pool of blood, Doakes embodies the feeling you have that this is not normal. But the mask is a little too perfect. He says the quiet part out loud, and the story punishes him for it. Now, let's look at how the series turns that tension into structure. The recurring motif of close calls and near misses is not just a string of convenient escapes. It is a pattern of almost truths that keep brushing against Dexter's surface. A mislabeled bloodslide here, an odd absence there, a boat seen leaving the marina at the wrong hour. We are going to watch Doakes bump into these fragments again and again, like a man walking the outline of a secret he cannot yet name. By the time we reach the cabin in Season 2, that confrontation will feel explosive. But the seeds of it are already there. In that first episode, in a single look, Doakes gives Dexter across a brightly lit hallway, as if he has already seen the ending and is just waiting for the rest of Miami Metro to catch up. So in this section, we are going to do something simple on the surface and quietly ambitious underneath. We are going to map the entire hunt. From that first hard stare in the pilot hallway, all the way to the shackles, the cage, and the taped confession in that cabin by the water. The roadmap is straightforward. We start at day 1. Dexter Morgan walking into Miami Metro homicide with donuts and a smile, and Doakes already refusing the performance. Then, we move through Season 1, moment by moment, tracking every time Doakes catches Dexter just a little out of place, the wrong expression at the wrong crime scene, the way he lingers around violence he should be recoiling from, the nights he is the last one to leave the building, or the first one to arrive at a body. From there, we follow Season 2 as the pattern tightens. This is the story of suspicion turning into procedure. Doakes watching Dexter's timing. Doakes checking his rentals, learning about the boat, noticing how often Morgan's name is adjacent to the bloodiest files in the building. And then, eventually, Doakes putting his hands on the thing that matters most, the blood slides. The tiny archive of trophies that finally moves him from this guy is wrong to this guy is the butcher. Structurally, we are going to stay almost completely chronological. Early on, Doakes' reactions are gut level. He looks at Dexter and sees a predator. Then, as the series moves forward, that instinct evolves into active surveillance. He tails Dexter through Miami streets. He breaks into Dexter's apartment. He follows him to that cabin in the Everglades. By the time we reach their final confrontation, Doakes is not just accusing Dexter in anger. He is reciting a case file he has built in his head, backed by proof he has touched. What makes this especially interesting is what happens when you lay them all out together. Every look across a hallway, every clipped insult at a crime scene. Every time Doakes arrives half a step too late to see Dexter with a body instead of a report, you start to see how thin Dexter's mask has always been, and how relentless Doakes' instincts become once he decides that this quiet blood analyst is not harmless, just careful. We will also glance ahead to how the revival, Dexter, New Blood, recontextualizes all of this. The later series shows us that Dexter's pattern of almost being caught never really stops, it just changes zip codes. When you remember Doakes while watching Angela Bishop connect the dots, the early seasons start to feel less like a lucky escape and more like a countdown that began the first time one cop refused to be charmed. And as we walk through these scenes in order, settle in, get comfortable with one lingering question. There is a specific early moment where Doakes stops merely suspecting and starts knowing. It happens before the blood slides, before the cabin, before the official Bay Harbor Butcher investigation ever has his name. We are going to find that exact line together a little later in this video. So before we follow that line all the way to the end, this is where we slow down for just a moment together. This video is built to run long. It is meant to be something you can put on at night, let the room go dark, and know that the story will keep unfolding even if your eyes close for a while. You can drift in and out, and when you come back. We are going to still be somewhere inside Miami Metro homicide, still tracing the same cat and mouse between Doakes and Dexter Morgan. That is why these breakdowns move the way they do. Not as a rapid recap, but as a slow burn investigation, where every look across a squad room, every offhand comment, every tiny crack in Dexter's mask gets its own space. When you lay them all out together across the series, you start to see how fragile his double life always was, and how many people almost followed their instincts all the way to the truth. If you want more of that kind of long-form, late-night storytelling, this is the practical place to mention it. Subscribing and turning on notifications is the simplest way to make sure you do not miss the next time we sit with another character who nearly exposed Dexter, or quietly mirrored his darkness, or carried a suspicion that never quite made it into an official report. It is also the easiest way to support more deep dives into these near-miss moments, where the tension comes less from jump scares and more from the slow realization that someone has been right about him from the very beginning. So settle in, get comfortable. If you are listening while you try to fall asleep, you do not have to do anything else. The episodes, the seasons, the evidence will keep lining up on their own. But if you are awake and you want this kind of calm, forensic storytelling waiting for you the next time you open your feed, you can take a second now to tap subscribe and let the algorithm know you want more nights like this. This will be the only pause for housekeeping. From here on, we stay inside the story. No more stepping outside to talk about buttons or metrics, just the steady pressure of one man who sees through Dexter's mask and refuses to look away. So let's go back to where that pressure really begins. The pilot. The first day, Dexter and Doakes share a room at Miami Metro. The first briefing, where everyone else laughs at Dexter's charm, and one man in the corner is already staring at him like he is guilty of something no one has proved yet. This is the story of what Doakes sees in that room, and why, from that first moment, he never lets it go. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, and go back to that first day at Miami Metro Homicide. The briefing room is bright, almost soft. Dexter Morgan walks in with his usual tools of camouflage, polite smile, easy posture, a box of donuts that says, "I am harmless." This is the story of a man who has spent his whole life learning how to be liked in rooms exactly like this. Everyone plays their part on cue. Masuka laughs too loudly at his own joke. Deb is proud, a little nervous, eager to show off her foster brother. Lagerta leans in, charmed by Dexter's quiet confidence. On the surface, it is a warm, ordinary workday at Miami Metro. Another morning where the mask holds and the monster passes as a model employee. But that is not the whole story. Because in the corner of the frame, There is one person who does not join the performance. Doakes does not smile. He does not nod along. He just looks at Dexter, and the look is almost physically intrusive, like a hand pressing against glass to see what is underneath. Where everyone else sees a helpful blood guy, Doakes sees an absence. The show underlines it a few scenes later at a crime scene. Dexter is doing what he does best, narrating the blood, turning violence into clean, clinical language. The others are impressed. Doakes isn't. He steps in with that flat, cutting line about Dexter being creepy, about him having no feelings. It sounds blunt, even rude, but when you lay them all out together, those words are an X-ray. He is not saying Dexter is odd. He is diagnosing an emotional void before any evidence exists. And Dexter feels it. His internal monologue, which treats most people as pieces on a board, shifts when it lands on Doakes. There is no playful contempt, no easy dismissal. Instead, there is caution. Wariness, you start to see him recognize that this is someone he cannot charm with pastries and polite small talk, someone who is not participating in the social fiction that keeps him safe. Doakes' background makes that reaction make sense. Ex-Special Forces, combat, interrogation, he has spent years studying faces that lie for a living. He knows what it looks like when someone has taken a life and felt something about it they should not have felt. He knows what it looks like when a person's reactions are too smooth, too controlled, like they have been rehearsed instead of lived. So, on day one, that pilot glare is not random hostility, it is pattern recognition. Doakes' training has tuned him to flinches, micro-expressions, the tiny delays between stimulus and response. When he looks at Dexter, he does not see quirky. He sees dangerous. And from that first moment, the only real question left for him is not if he is right, but how long it will take to prove it, and how much damage Dexter can do before he does. To understand why that question never leaves him, we are going to step back into the part of Doakes' life the show mostly keeps in the margins, the years before Miami Metro homicide, when getting a read on someone was not about good paperwork, it was about staying alive until morning. Doakes is ex-Special Forces. That is not just a cool line on his personnel file. It is a whole education in human danger. He has moved through combat zones where a calm face at a checkpoint can be the last thing you ever see. He has worked black ops, where the people sitting across from him were trained, like him, to lie without blinking, to steady their breathing, to keep their hands relaxed while they decided whether to kill you. In that world, reading people is not a soft skill. It is a survival instinct that gets sharpened, night after night, until it becomes automatic. And in those environments, you start to see patterns. Men who enjoy violence a little too much. Men who feel nothing at all. Men who tell lies with such a straight face that the lie is not in the words, it is in the absence of normal emotion around them. Special Forces training leans into that. It teaches you to watch for sociopathic behavior, for emotional disconnection, for the way a person's eyes fail to match the tone of their voice. Doakes learns to clock the microsecond delay before a rehearsed answer, the way someone's posture loosens when they think no one is looking. By the time he walks into Miami Metro, those instincts are already wired in. Then he spends years in homicide, sitting in interrogation rooms, watching how ordinary suspects react to violence. Shock, revulsion, guilt that leaks out sideways in over-explaining, or nervous laughter. Every moment becomes another data point, and every so often, he meets a true predator, the kind of person who talks about death like they are describing the weather, whose pulse barely changes when they see crime scene photos. Those are the ones who feel familiar from his past life. So when Doakes looks at Dexter Morgan, smiling with his donuts, playing the harmless blood guy, the contrast is jarring. Everyone else at Miami Metro sees a helpful technician with a quirky sense of humor. Doakes sees something he has met before in war zones and in interrogation chairs. A man whose affect does not match the subject matter, whose calm is not normal calm, but practiced control. The mask is good. It just is not good enough for someone like him. To Doakes, Dexter never quite feels like a coworker. He feels like a target, a dangerous man he used to hunt, now walking freely through the squad room. And once that association clicks, it never fully turns off. What begins as a hard stare in the pilot quietly becomes a slow, unofficial investigation that runs underneath every interaction, every sideways comment. Every time he finds Dexter somewhere he should not be. Now, let's watch how that background suspicion turns into open pursuit and how close he comes to tearing the mask off completely. That background suspicion doesn't stay abstract for very long. It gets its first real test under harsh fluorescent lights, in front of cooling bodies and humming generators, where Dexter Morgan is supposed to look like everyone else and absolutely does not. We are going to sit in that first crime scene for a moment. Night air thick, red and blue washing over the street, yellow tape cutting a clean line between the living and the dead. Uniforms murmur. A detective retches quietly behind a squad car. Techs move a little too fast, the way people do when they are trying not to think about what they are seeing. And in the middle of it, Dexter walks in like he is arriving at the office 5 minutes early. He doesn't flinch at the bodies. He doesn't avert his eyes. He studies them with a calm, almost gentle focus, narrating blood patterns in his head while everyone else is working to keep their own thoughts from drifting toward their families. This is the story of a man who feels most at home in the worst rooms Miami Metro Homicide ever sees, and in this moment, you start to see just how visible that comfort really is. Doakes notices. Of course he does. He steps into Dexter's space, eyes never leaving his face, and cuts straight through the small talk. He tells him he doesn't like him, that there's something off, then lands on the line that matters. Dexter has no feelings about these bodies. It is an accusation disguised as an observation, the kind of thing most cops would only say privately, if they said it at all. Because you do not usually challenge a colleague like that, not in the open, not at a scene. There's an unspoken rule that everyone gets to cope in their own way as long as the work gets done. Doakes breaks that rule on day one. That is how far outside the norm Dexter's composure already is. Dexter's response is smooth on the surface, a practiced deflection, a half smile that says he's heard it before, that he's just the quirky blood guy who likes his job too much. But his internal narration gives the real reaction away. He is unsettled, almost startled, that someone has articulated the exact thing his mask is designed to hide. Not just that he is calm, but that there is nothing human underneath that calm for these victims. For Doakes, this becomes the first hard data point. Not just a vibe, not just a personality clash, but observed behavior that does not match how a normal lab tech should move through carnage. When you lay them all out together later, this is where the pattern starts. And it will not be the last time. Scene after scene, season after season, Doakes will keep finding Dexter alone with death. Too comfortable, too quiet. Each encounter adds another weight to the scale, another reason his certainty hardens just a little more, until suspicion is no longer a question, but a waiting verdict. When you lay them all out together later, something else appears in the background. Not just a hunter slipping through Miami nights, but another figure, always nearby, always watching. So for a moment, settle in, get comfortable, and let's turn the frame. Imagine this entire series from James Doakes' point of view. You are a seasoned cop, ex-Special Forces, a man who has seen what real monsters do to human bodies and to human faces. You walk into Miami Metro Homicide every morning, surrounded by people you respect, people you bleed with on the job. And in the middle of that room there is Dexter Morgan, the friendly blood guy everyone seems to like. From the outside, Dexter is background noise. He brings donuts, he makes neat diagrams, he stands just behind the yellow tape, translating blood into tidy narratives. But in Doakes' story, Dexter is the opposite of background. He is the quiet, unsettling presence who keeps showing up at the edges of violent scenes, like a recurring shadow your eye can't quite ignore. This is the story of a man who notices that the shadow is always there. Think back to those early interactions we have been tracing. The pilot crime scene where Dexter looks just a little too calm. The way he drifts toward the most brutal evidence instead of away from it. The late nights in the lab, long after anyone else has gone home. From Dexter's perspective, these are routine moments. From Doakes' perspective, each one is a small alarm bell, another confirmation that the pleasant analyst standing next to him is carrying something cold and inhuman behind the mask. You start to see how different the emotional temperature of every scene becomes if you stand where Doakes is standing. When Dexter smiles, it is not charming. It is information. When Dexter volunteers insight, it is not helpful. It is suspicious. When Dexter shows up first at a scene, or lingers last, Doakes is the one quietly asking why the blood expert always seems to be alone with the dead. The same gestures that reassure everyone else harden his certainty. The series quietly supports this reading. Doakes is not just a hot-headed sergeant. He is the audience's suspicion made flesh. He says the things many viewers are already thinking about Dexter, that he is creepy, that he is wrong, that no one should be that comfortable with carnage. He follows the instincts we are going to keep tracing, even when it makes him look obsessive, unstable, or out of line. And then, just as that version of the story starts to take shape, we pull back. We return to Dexter's timeline, to the chronological buildup of close calls and confrontations, carrying Doakes' gaze with us. Because from this point on, every time Dexter almost gets caught, it is worth asking, very quietly, how it looked to the one man who never needed proof to know. So when the ice truck killer case hits Miami, we are going to carry that gaze with us. The city is on edge, the news cycles are relentless, and inside Miami Metro Homicide, the pressure settles over every desk like humidity. Bodies dismembered, blood carefully drained, scenes staged with a level of control that makes seasoned detectives quietly uneasy. For most of the squad, this is the nightmare version of their job. For Dexter Morgan, it is something else. He walks those scenes with a stillness that does not match the mood in the room. Where Mosika cracks nervous jokes and Deborah vibrates with ambition and fear, Dexter studies the cuts, the absence of blood, the clean plastic. He narrates in that calm inner voice an almost admiring breakdown of the killer's precision. From our usual vantage point in the series, that fascination reads like professional curiosity mixed with dark kinship. But you start to see how different it looks if you are Doakes, standing just a few feet away, watching the same man. Doakes hears the way Dexter talks about the ice truck killer. Not as a monster terrorizing Miami, not even as a target to bring down, but as if he is evaluating someone's technique. There is a moment at one of the early crime scenes where this contrast sharpens. Everyone else is tense, moving quickly, the air thick with the knowledge that a serial killer is active. Dexter, by contrast, lingers over a severed limb, noting the lack of hesitation in the cuts. The careful preservation of skin. His voice is even. His breathing does not change. To a man trained in special forces to read stress and fear, that composure is not reassuring. It is alarming, and Doakes clocks it. He does not say much, because he rarely does in these early episodes, but the camera gives us just enough, a narrowed glance when Dexter stays behind that extra second. A hard stare when Dexter describes the killer like a craftsman perfecting his art. This is the story of a man building a private case file in his head, one strange reaction at a time. Doakes does not yet have a theory he can put on paper. He cannot walk into Lagerda's office and say, "My blood guy is too calm around serial killers." But he can collect moments. The way Dexter smiles slightly at the ingenuity of a refrigerated truck. The way he calls the killer interesting instead of dangerous. The way his eyes light up, not when they find a lead, but when they find a new piece of the puzzle. When you lay them all out together, these are small fractures in the mask. Tiny, deniable, easy for everyone else to miss. For Doakes, they are early proof that Dexter Morgan does not experience this horror the way normal people do. And while the entire department throws its weight behind catching the ice truck killer, Doakes is quietly doing something else. He is watching the quiet predator who never flinches, waiting for the first real slip. It will not take long. It starts with something deceptively simple. Dexter Morgan walking into Miami Metro Homicide every morning like the office golden retriever. He has the donuts. He has the easy joke. He has that soft, practiced smile that seems designed to smooth over whatever gruesome case file is sitting on the table. On the surface, this is harmless. Comforting, even, in a room full of burnt-out detectives and fresh crime scene photos, the agreeable blood guy who remembers birthdays and refills the coffee pot feels like a gift. He diffuses tension with a quip, shrugs off stress, and never appears rattled by the violence he documents. When you lay them all out together, these moments read as classic workplace coping mechanisms. But that is not how Doakes reads them, because Doakes has spent too much of his life around men who cultivated that same effortless charm as a kind of camouflage. In Special Forces, in the darker corners of Miami, he has watched people hide behind friendliness, behind jokes, behind a carefully curated warmth that kept anyone from asking what they did when the lights were off. So when Dexter leans into the nice guy act, Doakes does not relax. He stiffens. The more helpful Dexter becomes, the more insistently polite he is. The more that internal alarm starts to hum. We're going to see this pattern again and again across the first 2 seasons. Every time Dexter tries to disarm Doakes with kindness, the hostility on Doakes' face only deepens. There is that early scene in the bullpen where Dexter offers him a donut, the same way he does with everyone else. Most people smile, take one, and move on. Doakes stares at him, refuses, and walks away. No banter, no pretend civility. The rejection is sharp enough that even Dexter is momentarily thrown. For Doakes, though, this is a line in the sand. He is not going to be bought off with sugar and small talk. Later, at crime scenes, Dexter tries to keep things light. He cracks a dry remark over a body, offers Doakes a neat, blood spatter explanation with that calm, almost soothing tone. Doakes answers with a glare, a clipped insult, or a blunt, "Stay the hell away from me." The more Dexter pushes for normal coworker rapport, the more Doakes digs in. You start to see that the politeness itself is what he finds suspicious. This is the story of a man who has learned to interpret excessive pleasantness as a mask. Doakes, real people in homicide, are tired, irritable, occasionally shaken. Dexter is none of those things. He is always agreeable, always composed, always ready with the exact right reaction. It is just a little too perfect. And so, every cheerful greeting, every carefully timed joke, every box of donuts does the opposite of what Dexter intends. Instead of lowering Doakes' guard, it sharpens his focus, pushing him to look past the smile and into the silence underneath it, where something colder is waiting. Now, let's follow what happens once that coldness finally breaks the surface. That coldness finally shows itself on a night that should have made Dexter invisible. We are going to step into a Miami nightclub, bass shaking the floor, lights strobing across sweat and sequins, bodies pressed together in a way that makes everyone blur into one moving organism. It is the perfect place for someone like Morgan to disappear into the crowd, to let the noise wash over him and hide the fact that he feels none of what everyone else is chasing. But Dexter does not blend. Not really. He stands just a fraction too still. His smile comes half a second too late. While Deborah laughs too loudly and officers from Miami Metro Homicide drink and shout over the music, Dexter looks like a man rehearsing normal, not living it. And in that sea of distraction, there is one pair of eyes that never loses him. Doakes watches the way Dexter hovers at the edge of the group, present but slightly detached, like a tourist in his own life. Then, he makes his move. He waits for a transition song, for the moment when sound swells and the lights flare, and he steers Dexter away from the bar, away from Deb, away from anyone who might soften what he is about to say. They end up in a narrow hallway near the bathrooms, where the music is muffled, but still heavy enough to swallow anything short of a shout. It is public, but private enough. Perfect for a conversation that is not supposed to exist. Doakes steps in a little too close, cutting off Dexter's exit, and looks straight into his face, not at his drink, not at his clothes, at his eyes. He tells Dexter, in that low, contemptuous voice, that there is something wrong there. No party, no joy, just that flat, dead look he has seen before in soldiers who have done things they will never talk about, and in killers who have long since stopped pretending to care. You start to see the pattern. Doakes is not guessing. He is matching a profile from memory. Dexter tries to laugh it off. He leans on the familiar lines about being socially awkward, about not being good at the whole fun and dancing thing. On the surface, it is the same harmless mask. But inside, his narration tightens. He notes how close Doakes is standing, how specific the language is, how this is not about office banter anymore. This is the story of a man realizing that another predator is reading him in real time. When you lay them all out together, these confrontations stop feeling like random jabs and start to look like controlled experiments. Doakes is watching Dexter's pupils, his micro-reactions, the way his voice either spikes or stays level. He is running a psychological test with the chaos of the club as cover, probing for a flinch that would confirm everything. Dexter barely gives him one. Barely, and as they walk back toward the pulsing lights, the danger has not passed. It has only changed shape, becoming quieter, more focused, and much harder to shake. Settle in, get comfortable, because the next time Doakes corners Dexter, there will be evidence on the table, not just instinct. Settle in, get comfortable, because before Doakes ever has evidence, the series is already training you to react to Dexter in a very specific way. From the pilot onward, so many early Dexter scenes are built as darkly comic beats. Dexter Morgan wandering through Miami Metro Homicide with a box of donuts. Dexter fumbling through small talk at the station. Dexter over-explaining blood spatter to people who did not ask. The show invites you to laugh at his awkwardness, to treat his social misfires as a kind of safety valve that makes his violence easier to sit with. He jokes about not understanding human emotions. He narrates his own absence of feeling with a wry, almost playful tone. And every time he does, the camera, the music, and the reactions around him all lean in the same direction. This is charming. This is disarming. This is the mask that lets you stay close to a killer without pulling away. But that is not how Doakes experiences any of it. Doakes almost never steps into that levity. When other detectives smirk at Dexter's quirks, Doakes just stares. When Dexter makes an odd comment at a crime scene, most people treat it like a harmless eccentricity. Doakes hears it like a slip, a tell, a little flash of something predatory that everyone else has decided is a punchline. The same lines that play as dry humor for you land as confirmation for him that something is wrong. This is where the tonal clash really begins to matter. Because on the surface, Doakes comes off abrasive. He swears at Dexter, crowds his personal space, calls him out as creepy in front of colleagues who would rather keep the office mood light. In the day-to-day story of Miami Metro, that makes him the problem. He is the one disrupting the flow, the one refusing to go along with the unspoken agreement that Dexter is comic relief, not a threat. Yet when you lay them all out together, every early stare, every cutaway to Doakes not laughing, you start to see how the series is quietly giving you a choice. You can stay with the charm, or you can sit with the discomfort. And Doakes is the embodiment of that discomfort. His seriousness acts as a counterweight to Dexter's narration, anchoring the narrative in the simple, unfunny reality that this man we are going to follow for 8 seasons is, in fact, a killer. It is a small pattern interrupt built into almost every group scene, the joke, the laugh, the one man who does not join in. Over time, that rhythm makes Doakes feel strangely trustworthy, especially to a viewer who already senses that Dexter's mask is too perfect. And as we move into season 2, that refusal to laugh is about to harden into something more dangerous than a bad mood. It becomes surveillance, confrontation, and finally, an investigation that Dexter cannot charm his way out of. That shift is where season 1 quietly does something important. It turns Doakes from an unpleasant coworker into a kind of moving perimeter around Dexter Morgan, a human alarm system that keeps getting closer every time we see him. At first, it is just friction. In the pilot, everyone else at Miami Metro Homicide laughs with Dexter, takes the donuts, enjoys the blood spatter magic trick. Doakes does not. He steps in too close at that crime scene and calls Dexter out as creepy, not because of anything Dexter has done, but because of the way he stands there. A little too calm in the presence of mutilated bodies. On its own, it is a personality clash. But when you lay them all out together, these early moments start to look less random. We are going to move through that first season the way Doakes does, by accumulation. Every week, there is another body, another extreme tableau of violence, and somehow Dexter is always right there at the center of it. He shows up early. He lingers late. He seems energized by the worst scenes in the city. And Doakes, trained by special forces work and years on the street, notices that this is not how normal people metabolize horror. The role Doakes plays in the story shifts almost without you realizing it, in the background of briefings and bullpen chatter. He stops being just the guy who snaps at Dexter and starts to feel like a shadow. He appears in doorways when Dexter thinks he is alone. He watches from across the room when Dexter is cataloging blood. He cuts through the noise of the squad with a single look that says he is taking mental notes, even if he is not saying much out loud. You start to see it in their confrontations. A snide comment at a crime scene turns into pointed questions about why Dexter is always there, why he smiles at corpses, why he seems to enjoy the work too much. Doakes pushes, then waits. He tests Dexter's reactions, looking for fear, anger, anything that would prove there is a real person under that polite mask. Instead, he finds composure, practiced lines, and the same hollow charm every time. Around them, the rest of Miami Metro writes it off. To Lagerta and the others, this is just Doakes being Doakes. Another outburst from an abrasive sergeant who cannot stand the quirky lab guy. Dexter benefits from office politics without lifting a finger. The more Doakes bristles, the more unreasonable he looks, and the more everyone rallies around Morgan as the harmless analyst caught in the crossfire. But that is not how it feels inside Doakes' head. By the end of season 1, he may not have evidence, but he has a pattern. And this is the story of a man who trusts patterns more than charm. In his mind, the case is already decided. Dexter is dangerous. The only question as we move forward is how far he is willing to go to prove it, and what happens when he finally does. So when season 2 opens, the universe finally gives Doakes something that looks big enough to match the shape of his suspicion. The calm surface of Miami's water is broken, literally, as garbage bags begin to rise from the depths. Divers, floodlights, blue tarps. The Bay Harbor Butcher is not introduced as a mystery so much as a mass grave that has been quietly waiting just offshore. On paper, it is just another serial case for Miami Metro homicide, another horror in a city that has learned to metabolize horror. But the scale is different. Dozens of dismembered bodies, all meticulously wrapped, all preserved in a way that speaks of ritual and control. And every single bag tells the same quiet truth. Whoever did this has been operating for years. Almost within sight of the station, without leaving a usable trace. The more details come in, the narrower the circle becomes. The cuts are clean, the disarticulation is precise. There is no chaotic overkill, no hesitation, no improvisation. This is someone who understands blood, decomposition, ocean currents, and evidence chains. Someone who knows exactly what Miami's heat and salt water will do to tissue, and how long a body can sit on the ocean floor before it rises. Not just a killer, a technician. And when you lay them all out together, those details stop feeling abstract, because we are going to remember who, at Miami Metro, already lives in that intersection of science and death. Dexter Morgan, the quiet blood spatter analyst who spends his days reconstructing violence in the lab and his nights on a boat that just happens to launch from the same marina the FBI is now crawling over. To most of the squad, that overlap is invisible. To someone already watching Dexter, it is almost painfully obvious. For Doakes, this case does not arrive in a vacuum. It arrives on top of every odd moment we have already seen. Dexter at crime scenes with no clear reason, Dexter's flat affect around corpses, Dexter's too quick explanations when challenged. The Butcher investigation feels less like a new puzzle and more like a translation. Suddenly, there is a name, a file, a code number for the free-floating dread he has carried since the pilot. His reaction is not just professional disgust, it is recognition. This is the first killer in the series whose footprint feels large enough, disciplined enough, to match the thing he has been trying to articulate about Dexter's mask. You start to see it in the way he looks at Morgan during briefings, the way his eyes linger a second too long when Lundy describes a forensically skilled insider with access to crime scenes and a boat. Now, let's settle in. Get comfortable with the idea that for Doakes, the Bay Harbor Butcher is never an abstract monster out there. It is a label moving steadily closer to the man at the next desk. This is the story of a suspicion finally finding its proper scale, and of what happens when the investigation on the board starts to mirror the investigation he has been running, alone in his own head. So when the Bay Harbor Butcher case finally drags everyone out to the water, Doakes is already primed to see one thing: how Dexter behaves when the bodies come home. The docks are crowded, the air heavy with salt and diesel, and under it all, the quiet knowledge that someone has been using this stretch of ocean as a graveyard. Search boats idle just off the pier, their lights sweeping the surface as divers bring up black, glistening body bags, one by one. Miami Metro Homicide is clustered near the tape, talking logistics, jurisdiction, press. And then there is Dexter Morgan, moving through the middle of it with a kind of unhurried certainty, like this is not horror, but a puzzle he's been waiting to solve. He leans in close to the recovered bags, eyes tracking the seams of the plastic, the way the water has worked on the flesh inside. He asks the right questions about currents, about depth, about how long the remains could have stayed preserved. On paper, it is just a skilled blood analyst doing his job. In practice, there is an ease to him here that does not match the supposed violence of the scene. Doakes notices. He hangs back, just outside the main knot of detectives, not really listening to the briefing. His focus is narrower. He watches Dexter's face instead of the water, measuring every micro-reaction, every tiny shift in posture when another bag hits the deck or another diver calls out. There is a flicker of something when Dexter first sees the pattern of the cuts. Not shock, not disgust. Recognition? It's gone almost as soon as it appears, buried under that pleasant, professional mask he wears around the lab. But Doakes has spent years in special forces and then at Miami Metro, learning what people look like when they are trying not to feel something. And the more Dexter tries to stay neutral, the more obvious it becomes that he is not. We are going to see this again and again across the series, the way Dexter's internal excitement at a worthy opponent leaks through in the smallest ways. A slightly too long glance at the water. A breath that comes out almost like relief when the FBI profile mentions a meticulous method. You start to see why, for Doakes, this is not just another crime scene. It is a behavioral test he has been waiting to run. Because the butcher's disposal site is not some abstract location out there. It is this exact environment. Boats rocking in their slips, dark water folding over itself, a marina Dexter knows well enough to navigate in his sleep. When you lay them all out together, the forensic precision, the boat, the comfort at the dock, it draws a line straight from the method to the man. By the time the sun starts to bleed out behind the cranes, Doakes is not walking away with answers. He is walking away with a tightening conviction that the killer might have been standing 3 feet from him the entire time. And the next time Dexter heads for this water, Doakes is not going to stay in the shadows quite so long. So the next time Dexter heads for the water, Doakes does exactly what his training tells him to do when command won't listen. He stops waiting for permission. He starts watching. Inside Miami Metro Homicide, there is no appetite for his theory. There is no report he can file that says, "My colleague feels wrong." Laguerta needs clean cases and good press. Lundy is chasing a faceless Bay Harbor butcher, not the quiet blood guy who brings donuts. To everyone else, Morgan is useful, polite, almost invisible. Doakes is the one making noise, and in a department built on hierarchy and paperwork, noise without evidence sounds like a liability. But that is exactly where Doakes has lived his whole life. In special forces, you move first and justify later. So when the official channels fail him, he does what the institution cannot. He goes off the clock. We are going to sit with that shift for a moment. Because this is the story of a cop who stops being a coworker and starts being a shadow. We see him hanging back in the parking lot as Dexter leaves late, engine idling, lights off just long enough to slip in behind that familiar car. We see him following at a distance across the causeway, watching Dexter peel away from normal routes, home and toward marinas, storage units, and empty stretches of industrial Miami, where no analyst has any reason to be at midnight. Every mile he tails Dexter, Doakes is putting his badge on the line. If Internal Affairs catches him running an unsanctioned surveillance on a fellow officer with no probable cause beyond a gut feeling, his career is over. And yet, he keeps doing it, night after night. Because you start to see that, for Doakes, the greater risk is pretending he does not recognize the predator in front of him. There are moments where the two lines almost cross in open daylight. Doakes tracks Dexter to that remote cabin in the Everglades, creeping through the brush, weapon drawn, close enough to hear movement inside. Dexter is there with his tools, with his blood slides, with the life he has built in secret. One more minute, one more step, and Doakes would see everything. Instead, Dexter feels the pressure, abandons the ritual, and slips away just ahead of him, leaving only questions and a rising certainty behind. Later, when Doakes breaks into Dexter's apartment and finds the hidden box of slides, it feels less like a discovery and more like confirmation the series has been promising since season 1. The tailing, the late-night stakeouts, the quiet car rides where he watches Dexter's silhouette through a windshield, none of it was paranoia. It was hunting. And Dexter feels it. The easy banter at work stiffens. The distance between day mask and night self narrows. When you lay them all out together, every near miss, every sudden change of course, you can feel the net tightening, even if no one else at Miami Metro can see it yet. And that gap, that space where no one at Miami Metro can see the net, is where the real cost of being right starts to show. Because for Doakes, this is not just a professional hunch. It is a private war that no one else believes is happening. We are going to step away from the evidence for a moment and sit with that. Imagine walking into work every day, knowing with the same certainty you have about gravity or fire, that the smiling blood guy in the lab is a predator. Every time Dexter Morgan jokes with Masika, every time he brings donuts, Doakes is watching a mask. And the more he sees, the more alone he becomes. At first, that intensity is what made him valuable. This is the story of a man whose special forces training, whose years in Miami homicide, tuned him to notice what other people are happy to ignore. He reads micro-expressions, body language, the way a room changes temperature when violence walks in. But that same sharpness, that hair-trigger temper and refusal to play nice, turns against him the second he points it at Dexter. Now, when you lay them all out together, every outburst, every confrontation, you start to see the trap. Doakes calls Dexter creepy in the pilot, not as a joke, but as a diagnosis, and people laugh it off. He tails Dexter, checks his rentals, breaks into his apartment. On paper, it looks obsessive. In conversation, it sounds like a grudge. The more urgent he becomes, the easier it is for colleagues to file him under angry instead of accurate. Here's the pattern. Interrupt. The show quietly asks, what if the person shouting is the only one who is seeing clearly? In another series, that anger would be proof he is wrong. In Dexter, it is proof he cannot live with the possibility that he is right and does nothing. The tragedy is structural, not just personal. Dexter's charm, his calm, his carefully rehearsed social cues all make him an ideal coworker. Doakes is the opposite, blunt, profane, impatient. When he tries to warn people, they are judging the delivery, not the information. It mirrors real-world whistleblowers, the hyper-vigilant employee who notices numbers that do not add up, the neighbor who keeps calling about something off. If they are abrasive, if they are tired and frustrated, it becomes very easy to dismiss the content because you do not like the container. So Doakes is right too early, in the wrong tone, in the wrong office. The series leans into that isolation, letting him feel more and more like a tragic figure, pacing at the edge of the frame. By the time the evidence trail finally starts to harden, he has already spent so long shouting into the void that no one is ready to hear him. And that is exactly where we return next, to the moments when his lonely certainty finally collides with proof he can put his hands on. So when that proof he can put his hands on finally arrives, it is not dramatic at first. It looks like Dexter doing what Dexter always does at Miami Metro Homicide, standing a little too close to the blood. From the beginning, the blood slides are the most honest thing in Dexter Morgan's life. Tiny glass rectangles, each one holding a single drop taken from a cheek, a throat, a chest. They are trophies, but also a diary, a private record of every moment the mask came off. And every single night, he goes home, opens that wooden box, and quietly revisits every person he has killed. On paper, it fits his job. He is the blood guy. He is supposed to care about spatter, angles, volume, but Doakes notices something else. He notices the way Dexter lingers over samples that should be routine, the way his eyes stay on a smear of red long after everyone else has moved on. In a room full of detectives, Dexter looks less like an analyst processing evidence and more like a collector admiring a favorite piece. We're going to stay with that for a moment, because this is where instinct starts to harden into pattern. By season 2, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation has given Miami Metro a new vocabulary: dismemberment, drainage, cleanliness. The FBI profile talks about a forensically skilled insider, someone with access to blood, to reports, to every single case file. When you lay them all out together, those descriptors do not just point vaguely inside the building, they point straight at the lab. Doakes is already circling Dexter by then, following him off hours, catching him at crime scenes he has no reason to attend. So when he starts to suspect that someone is archiving kills, keeping a meticulous, lab-like record of victims. It is not a leap to think of the man who already treats blood like a personal language. The idea of a slide box does not appear out of nowhere. It grows out of watching Dexter pause over a particular sample, out of seeing the almost reverent care he takes with glass and stain. And then, in the cabin, suspicion becomes something he can hold. Doakes finds the actual box, opens it, and sees rows of slides, each labeled, each perfect, each one a quiet confession. This is the story of a soldier finally finding the enemy's logbook. The Bay Harbor Butcher's work is methodical, clean, almost sterile. Dexter's access, his expertise, his strange attachment to blood, all converge in that wooden case. After that, Doakes is not guessing. You start to see the line he has been drawing in his head snap into focus: insider, boat, military precision, and now a forensic trophy ritual sitting in a neat little box. Once the blood slides enter the picture, this is no longer about vibes or bad feelings. It is about patterns that match too perfectly to ignore. And the real question becomes not whether Doakes is right, but how long a man can live after someone has seen his secrets arranged so neatly in glass. Once the blood slides enter the picture, the story leaves theory and steps onto a dirt road. Literally, we're going to follow Dexter Morgan out of the fluorescent safety of Miami Metro Homicide and into the Everglades, where he believes distance and darkness will keep his secrets safe. It is an ugly kind of quiet out there. Long, isolated stretches of road, swamp water soaking up sound, headlights carving out a narrow tunnel in the dark, while everything beyond the beams feels ancient and watching. Dexter thinks this is the point, far enough from the city, far enough from coworkers, that the Bay Harbor Butcher can work without the risk of a colleague driving by on the way home. But that calculation only holds if no one is already on your trail. Doakes has stopped believing Dexter's late nights and vague explanations. The just catching up on lab work, the couldn't sleep, the neat internal stories that satisfy everyone else at Miami Metro no longer work on a man trained to follow patterns across borders and battlefields. So he does something almost no one else in the series ever does with Dexter. He keeps following when the city lights end. You start to see the shift in power the moment Doakes' car slips in behind Dexter's on that empty highway. No backup, no warrant, just one man's certainty that the mask is a lie. He hangs back, kills his lights when he has to, and lets Dexter lead him deeper into the swamp. Step by step toward proof. The discovery itself is almost mundane in its staging, which is part of what makes it so unnerving. No dramatic chase, no shouted confession, just Doakes moving through Dexter's world, opening the wrong bag, the wrong compartment, and finding the neat little box of glass slides that does not belong in a normal forensic analyst's life. Each slide, each square of preserved blood, quietly links to a body no one has found yet. In that moment, the Bay Harbor butcher stops being an abstraction. Doakes is holding a physical index of killings, assembled by someone with direct lab access and an intimate relationship with blood. When you lay them all out together, the marina, the boat, the algae, the precision. And now this trophy ritual, the profile does not point at a stranger. It points at the man who walks into Miami Metro every morning with donuts. Dexter feels the walls move. This is not a hunch he can joke away, or a surveillance tail he can lose in traffic. This is evidence in another cop's hands, evidence that could be walked into the squad room and laid on a table with his name written all over it. For a few beats, the series flirts with an almost impossible outcome. Dexter Morgan in handcuffs, not because of a clever task force, but because one man refused to stop looking. And yet, as we are going to see, even a discovery this direct does not end the story. It twists it. It pushes both men toward a cabin, a confrontation, and a resolution that solves the case on paper, while leaving the truth very much alive. So, before we walk into that cabin in the Everglades, before Doakes finally corners Dexter, with nowhere left to run, we are going to pause and step sideways. Because there is a quiet, uncomfortable question sitting underneath every moment of this hunt. What if James Doakes had simply gone by the book? Imagine an alternate season where, the second he finds Dexter's blood slides, he does not follow him to marinas and rentals and late-night drives. He walks them straight into Miami Metro homicide, sets them on LaGuardia's desk, and says the words out loud, "Your favorite blood guy is keeping trophies." No jungle chase, no personal stakeout, just evidence, procedure, and paperwork. On paper, it sounds simple. Slides that match the Bay Harbor butcher's ritual, found in the home of the man with unrestricted access to blood, crime scenes, and lab equipment. When you lay them all out together, it looks devastating. But then you start to see the frayed edges. Dexter Morgan is the person who makes their cases. He is the one who turns chaos into clean diagrams. He brings donuts. He remembers birthdays. Doakes, by contrast, is the volatile sergeant who already looks obsessed. In that version of the story, the room does not gasp and arrest Dexter in a single righteous moment. It hesitates. LaGuardia thinks of Doakes' temper, of his history with command. Debra thinks of her brother, who held her after the ice truck killer. Masuka thinks of the colleague who never complains about late nights. The slides alone might trigger an internal inquiry, a quiet suspension, maybe an FBI consult. But they are not, by themselves, an airtight case. And this is where Doakes' instincts collide with his distrust of the system. He has seen investigations buried by politics. He has watched guilty men walk on technicalities. He knows how easily a charming, indispensable analyst could explain away research samples, how quickly the narrative could flip from suspicious to smear campaign. So instead of building a slow, bureaucratic net, he chooses something sharper and more personal. He tails Dexter. He breaks into his apartment. he confronts him alone. Ironically, that choice may be one of the reasons Dexter survives as long as he does. By keeping the suspicion off the books, Doakes keeps it contained. There is no task force, no formal profile, no shared suspicion for Dexter to work against. Just one man he can frame, isolate, and ultimately let the story swallow. Settle in, get comfortable with that thought, because this is the story of how almost being caught can be safer than officially being accused. In the next moment, we leave the hypothetical behind and return to the very real cabin, where Doakes finally strips the mask away and forces Dexter to say what he is out loud. So now we follow them out of Miami, out of Metro, out of every fluorescent lit hallway where Dexter's mask usually lives, and into the woods. The cabin sits in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by water and trees, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing. No sirens, no office chatter, just stillness, and two men who have run out of places to pretend. It matters that it is this remote. In the city, Dexter Morgan can hide inside noise. Phones ring, detectives argue, cases pile up, and the story is always about something else. Here, there is no background narrative to slip into. The cabin is stripped down, rough walls, a concrete floor, the improvised cage where Dexter usually keeps his victims. It is a place designed for truth, even if Dexter never planned to use it that way. And for once, he is not the one in control. Doakes has already cornered him, tracked him, forced him off the grid. Depending on how you read the timing, Dexter is injured, disoriented by the explosion at the dock, or simply outmaneuvered. Either way, when we arrive in this moment, it is Dexter who is behind bars, hands bound, watching his own tools and plastic and knives sit just out of reach. The hunter is literally inside his own trap. Doakes steps into the role he was trained for long before this series began. Not the volatile cop at Homicide, not the man everyone calls angry, but the Special Forces interrogator who knows how to sit with a subject until the performance cracks. He circles the cage, lays out the evidence, the blood slides he pulled from Dexter's air conditioner, the boat records, the late nights at crime scenes. Every close call, every near miss, every time the mask almost came off, compressed into a single, suffocating conversation. The dialogue is simple, almost blunt. That is what makes it so sharp. Doakes tells him, again, that he is the Bay Harbor butcher. He does not say it like a theory. He says it like a fact he has already accepted, and now he is just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Dexter tries the old lines at first, the detached analyst, the helpful colleague, but there is nowhere for those personas to go in a 10 by 10 cage. And then, finally, he drops it. Dexter admits it. He acknowledges the killings, the code, the bodies in garbage bags sinking off the coast. In that instant, when you lay them all out together, you start to see the entire history between these two men reframed. Every glare across the bullpen, every "you're creepy," every time Doakes refused to be charmed, all of it is quietly vindicated. Doakes does not just suspect anymore. He has heard the truth spoken out loud, in Dexter's own voice, in Dexter's own sanctuary. This is the story of a man whose instincts were right from day one, finally proven in a room no one else will ever see. And as the light fades outside that cabin, we are going to watch how quickly a perfect confession can become absolutely useless. And just like that, the most important words Dexter Morgan has ever spoken are trapped in a place that might as well not exist. No cameras, no recording, no witness. Only a man everyone stopped listening to a long time ago. This is where the tragedy really starts to crystallize, because Doakes being right and being right early does not save him. it damns him. From the pilot onward, his hostility toward Dexter is so open, so constant, that it becomes background noise at Miami Metro Homicide. Every jab, every glare, every "I don't like you" trains the room to hear his future accusations as nothing more than a personal vendetta. When you lay them all out together, those early moments form a pattern that works against him. Doakes calling Dexter creepy, Doakes stepping between him and victims' families, Doakes snapping at him at crime scenes, while everyone else laughs off the tension. By the time the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation begins, the entire squad has normalized the conflict. Of course, Doakes thinks Dexter is up to something. Of course he's following him. That is just what those two do. But that normalization has a cost. It means that when Doakes' suspicion hardens into certainty, his credibility has already been quietly eroded. The same long memory that lets LaGuerta remember details of old cases also remembers years of Doakes barking at the lab geek. So, when blood slides show up in his car, when the narrative flips, and he is painted as the butcher. The institutional reflex is not to question the frame. It is to finally resolve an old annoyance. We are going to sit with how cruel that is. Because by the time Doakes has everything you would think he needs, physical evidence, a pattern, and eventually Dexter's own confession, he has no one left to bring it to. He is suspended. He is under suspicion. He is literally locked in a cabin in the Everglades while the official task force chases his ghost. You start to see how the show is quietly talking about systemic blindness. Institutions fail to catch monsters, not just because the monsters are clever, but because the people who see them first are often the ones the system has already pushed to the margins. The abrasive sergeant, the inconvenient witness, the person who makes trouble in meetings. Every close call, every near miss, every time the mask almost comes off, the structure closes ranks around the mask, not the truth. So when Dexter chains Doakes to that cage, his fate is not being written in that moment. It was written back in the pilot, the first time he chose to voice his instincts as open contempt instead of quiet documentation. Now, let's follow how the world moves on without him, and how the investigation neatly, almost comfortably, rearranges itself around the wrong man. So when Dexter chains Doakes in that cage, the world outside does something chillingly ordinary. It keeps turning. Miami Metro Homicide still clocks in, still brews coffee, still chases the Bay Harbor Butcher. Only now, the investigation has a Doakes-shaped hole right where the truth should be. This is the story of how Dexter fills that hole, not with a confession, but with a frame job so precise it could almost pass as another forensic report. He finds the cabin in the Everglades, a place already steeped in secrecy and violence, and he turns it into a stage. Plastic sheeting, dismemberment tools, garbage bags, and most importantly, his blood slides. The same trophies Doakes risked everything to steal from Dexter's apartment are repurposed as the centerpiece of the case against him. Every item is chosen to echo the butcher profile. Every placement is a sentence in a story Morgan needs Miami to read. But the evidence alone is not what makes it believable. Dexter understands something darker. He understands people. We are going to watch him leverage Doakes' isolation, his temper, his history. By the time those slides are found, Doakes has already vanished after a loud public confrontation. He has broken into Dexter's home, tailed him, shouted in the bullpen, and been warned by superiors to back off. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how easy it is for everyone to accept that the aggressive sergeant finally snapped. The frame works because it confirms what people already half believe. The quiet analyst could never be the monster. The angry cop just might. So Miami Metro walks into that cabin, sees the tools, the plastic, the trophies, and they do what institutions so often do in this series. They choose the narrative that restores order with the least emotional cost. Doakes becomes the Bay Harbor Butcher, on paper, in press conferences, in the official memory of the department. And that is the bitterest irony. The only man who truly knew Dexter, who looked past the mask from day one, is now recorded as the very thing Dexter actually is. His instincts were right, his target was right, but history will remember him as the predator and Dexter as the colleague who is sad about it in the hallway. This close call is different from all the others. Dexter is not just almost caught, he almost loses control of the story about who the killer really is. For a brief stretch of time, Doakes holds the narrative. He has the slides, the suspicions, the words that, if spoken to the right person, could redraw every line around Morgan's life. In silencing Doakes, Dexter regains that control, but at a cost the series keeps circling back to. He removes the one person who saw him clearly, and in doing so, he plants a lie so large it can only hold as long as no one ever looks too closely. Someone will. The question is, who and when? So now we are going to pause on that silence around Doakes and ask the uncomfortable question underneath it. Just how close did Dexter Morgan come to losing everything because one man refused to look away? When you lay them all out together, the pieces Doakes assembled form something much heavier than paranoia. It starts small, with behavioral tells. The way Dexter is too calm at scenes that shake everyone else in Miami Metro homicide. The way he drifts toward the most brutal cases, lingers a little too long with the bodies, smiles a little too easily afterward. Doakes clocks that from day one. Then he adds the blood slides, stolen from Dexter's apartment, each one a tiny, incriminating ritual that just happens to match the Bay Harbor Butcher's signature. From there, the trail out to the Everglades is almost overkill. Doakes follows Dexter's boat movements, finds the remote cabin, and finally forces the confession that all of this has been circling. In that single, raw moment, Dexter admits the truth out loud. No jokes, no mask. Just the killer Doakes has been describing since the pilot, finally speaking in the first person. But how much of that would have survived the bright light of an internal affairs investigation or a courtroom? The slides are powerful, yet Dexter's prints in his own home are not enough by themselves. The Everglades cabin is damning, but once Leela destroys it, that physical link is gone. Even the confession is fragile. It is off the record, in an unapproved location, with a suspect cop holding an unofficial prisoner. Legally, Dexter might have argued coercion. Institutionally, Miami Metro might have done what it often does, protect itself first. This is where the line between luck and skill blurs. Dexter's careful routines, his forensic expertise, his ability to anticipate procedure, all of that keeps him ahead for most of the story. Yet his survival in this arc hinges on timing he does not control. Leela finding the cabin when she does, Doakes being in the blast radius instead of the rescue helicopter, the slides ending up in Doakes' car at precisely the moment everyone needs a culprit. Any small deviation could have tipped the scales. One phone call from Doakes to the FBI before confronting Dexter at the cabin. One colleague who decided to take Doakes seriously and quietly shadow his investigation instead of dismissing it as a grudge. One supervisor who looked at the profile of a meticulous, forensically skilled killer with a boat and thought, let's at least rule out our friendly blood guy. This is the story of a mask that holds, but only just. Dexter walks back into Miami Metro cleared, his name polished by the very evidence that should have destroyed him, because the one man who knew the shape of the truth is erased from the narrative. On paper, the case is closed. In reality, the series leaves a faint outline where Doakes once stood, an absence that someone else will eventually feel when the pattern starts to repeat. On paper, Doakes is gone, and Dexter Morgan is safe. But before we move forward to the next close call, we're going to do something the series quietly invites you to do over and over again. We're going to stop, turn the camera a few degrees, and look at the same man through different eyes. When you lay them all out together, the contrast is almost uncomfortable. To Debra, Dexter is the one fixed point in a chaotic life. He is the protective brother who answered every late-night call, who showed up at every crime scene not just as Miami Metro's blood guy, but as her emotional anchor. She sees the awkward smiles as endearing, the flat affect as a kind of damaged innocence, the way he hovers around her cases as loyalty rather than control. For her, the mask is not a mask. It is the only version she has ever known. Doakes looks at the same man and sees a predator hiding in plain sight. The quiet is not shyness, it is surveillance. The lack of visible reaction is not trauma, it is calculation. Where Deb sees a brother who cannot quite express himself, Doakes sees a soldier who has learned to never leak information. Every moment Dexter stands just outside the yellow tape, just a little too still. Just a little too interested. Deb feels supported. Doakes feels hunted. The rest of Miami Metro Homicide falls somewhere in between, and the series uses that middle ground to lull you. LaGuerta interprets Dexter's quirks as harmless. The donuts, the polite small talk, the way he stays late in the lab become reasons to trust him, not red flags. Batista treats him like a gentle colleague who has seen too much blood and retreated into routine. The same behavior that makes Doakes narrow his eyes makes everyone else relax their shoulders. Here's the pattern interrupt. If you adopt Doakes' perspective, even for a few minutes, the entire series tilts. Those friendly lab consultations start to look like information gathering. The late nights at the office become opportunities to alter evidence. The boat trips, the missing hours, the way Dexter always seems to arrive at the right scene at the right time, all of it feels less like coincidence and more like choreography. You start to see how the show keeps you oscillating between empathy and dread. One scene invites you to feel for Morgan as a damaged child who learned to survive. The next, framed through Doakes' suspicion, reminds you that this is a man who dismembers people and goes back to work in the morning. This is the story of a mask that never fully comes off, but sometimes becomes almost transparent, depending on who is looking. So settle in, get comfortable with that discomfort, because this shift in angle is not just about Doakes. In the next sections, we will widen the lens and watch how this same tension plays out in every close call, with every person who ever gets close enough to really see Dexter. Now that we have that angle, we are going to widen the frame and look at the whole series as one long experiment in how long a mask can hold. Because once you know what it looks like when Doakes stares straight through Dexter Morgan, every later close call starts to feel like an echo. Think about how often the mask almost slips. In later seasons, it is partners and colleagues instead of one relentless sergeant. Miguel Prado watching Dexter at crime scenes a little too closely, seeing the calm where there should be horror. Lumen stepping into his ritual space and touching the plastic, the knives, the careful order of his kill tools. Hannah McKay reading his stillness not as shyness, but as a familiar kind of damage. Every moment is another version of that first uneasy stare in Miami Metro Homicide, just refracted through different people, different needs. The pattern is simple. Someone sees too much. They get too close. Then they are neutralized, redirected, or discredited. Doakes is framed as the Bay Harbor butcher. Miguel is eliminated on a rooftop wrapped in plastic. Lumen is gently pushed away once her purpose in Dexter's story is complete. Hannah is turned into a fugitive. Even Deborah, when her investigation gets too close, is slowly folded into the secret rather than allowed to expose it. When you lay them all out together, you start to see that the method barely changes. Only the faces do. And always, there's the mask. The friendly analyst, the good boyfriend, the devoted brother, the single father. Under pressure, that persona cracks at the edges. Dexter snaps at Masuka. He overreacts when someone touches his belongings. He arrives at scenes before the call should have reached him. Little fissures, tiny fractures, but never a complete shatter until the very end of the series, when there is no one left to protect and nowhere left to hide. This is the story of a man whose life is built on staying just inside the line of plausibility. He can be odd, but not alarming. Helpful, but never eager. Present at every key investigation, but always with a reason that sounds just believable enough. Doakes was simply the first person who refused those excuses on instinct. Everyone who comes after is, in some way, repeating his investigation without his clarity. So settle in, get comfortable with that idea, because once you have seen how Doakes reads Dexter in those early seasons, you cannot unsee the same warning signs in every later relationship. The too steady gaze, the rehearsed empathy, the way danger seems to follow him from Miami to Oregon in New Blood. In the next section, let's trace one of those later suspicions in detail and watch how closely it mirrors the first hunt. And once you notice those warning signs, you run into a quieter, more unsettling question. Why is Doakes almost alone in seeing them? How does a man like Dexter Morgan walk into Miami Metro homicide every morning, carrying a lifetime of violence, and still pass as the harmless blood guy with the donuts? Part of the answer is simple proximity. These people like him. They joke with him, share coffee with him, lean on his analysis to close cases. Over time, the rhythms of the workplace turn into a kind of soft focus. The more familiar Dexter becomes as a colleague, the harder it is for anyone to redraw him as a potential killer. The mask is reinforced not just by Dexter's performance, but by everyone else's investment in who they already believe he is. You start to see it in the way Deborah talks about him as her rock, or Batista thanks him for helping on a tough case. Every compliment, every small gesture of affection builds a psychological debt. If Dexter is a monster, then their judgment is flawed, their trust misplaced, their entire sense of the squad's moral center compromised. That is not a conclusion most people are eager to reach. So when little red flags appear, they bend instead of break. A strange look at a crime scene. An odd coincidence with a boat or a bloodslide. The human mind reaches for the least disruptive explanation first, especially when the person in question is useful, funny, apparently gentle. Cognitive dissonance does the rest. It is easier to believe that Doakes is overreacting than that Dexter Morgan, the man who helps them catch killers, might be one. Doakes sits outside that warm circle, almost by design. His temperament, his special forces background, the trauma he carries, all keep him from ever fully integrating into the easy banter of Miami Metro. He does not flirt his way through the day. He does not soften his language to make people comfortable. That distance, which makes him abrasive at the water cooler, also preserves his critical eye. He is not protecting a cherished image of Dexter because he never built one, but the institution itself pushes against him. Miami Metro prefers harmony over conflict, especially in a high-stress unit like homicide. A colleague who constantly questions, confronts, and refuses to play along with the social script is a problem to be managed, not a perspective to be honored. Doakes' confrontational style becomes the story, not the content of his suspicion. When you lay them all out together, the patterns of denial, the preference for the pleasant narrative, the sidelining of the difficult voice, you start to see a system that almost seems designed to ignore people like Doakes. And that is exactly the kind of system where someone like Dexter can thrive. Year after year. In the next section, we are going to watch what happens when that systemic blindness finally cracks, and the suspicion comes from someone much closer to home. And when that suspicion finally does come from closer to home, it does not arrive as a quiet, reasonable question. It arrives as James Doakes. Loud, profane, unblinking. The one person in Miami Metro homicide who looks at Dexter Morgan the way you sometimes catch yourself looking at him, not as a quirky hero, but as something deeply wrong. Because there is a tension built into this series from the very first season. You watch Dexter joke with Masuka, bring donuts, comfort Rita. You are invited to like him, to admire his precision, to feel a strange relief when a monster is neatly wrapped and dropped into the ocean. And at the same time, somewhere in the back of your mind, a quieter voice is saying, this is still a man who kidnaps people, tapes them down, and cuts them apart. That unease never fully goes away. Doakes is that unease with a badge and a service weapon. Where everyone else laughs off Dexter's oddness as social awkwardness, Doakes calls it what it feels like. Creepy, emotionless, dangerous. In the pilot, when others are charmed by Dexter's helpfulness, Doakes just stares and says he doesn't like the way Dexter looks at crime scenes. It is the show taking that private discomfort you might feel and putting it directly into the room. This is why he reads as an antagonist, even when he is technically correct. He blocks Dexter in hallways, snaps at him at bloody crime scenes, tails him through Miami like an angry shadow. Inside the story, he is the obstacle, the problem, the person making life harder for the protagonist we are following. But when you lay them all out together, every confrontation, every suspicion, you start to see that Doakes is also the closest thing the show has to your moral instincts, spoken out loud. He refuses to be soothed by the mask. He does not care that Dexter is useful to the department, or kind to Deborah, or gentle with Rita's kids. He just keeps circling the same core fact. Something about this man feels like violence. And in doing that, he keeps the narrative from drifting into pure wish fulfillment, into a fantasy where a good serial killer can operate forever, with no real cost, no real opposition, just clever kills and tidy cleanups. When Doakes dies, that counterweight goes with him. The show still has suspicion, still has danger, but the particular voice that says, without compromise, this is wrong, is gone. Later seasons feel different, partly because there is no longer someone inside Miami Metro who sees Dexter the way Doakes did from day one. And in the next section, we are going to watch how the series tries to rebuild that tension by moving the suspicion into Dexter's own home. So when that voice disappears from Miami Metro, the series does something interesting. It starts creating faint echoes of Doakes in other people, other cops who glance at Dexter Morgan and, for a moment, feel that same wrongness without knowing why. The most disciplined of those echoes is Frank Lundy. Lundy is not fueled by rage. He is quiet, methodical, almost gentle. But when he comes in to hunt the Bay Harbor butcher, you start to see the outline of Doakes' old suspicion reform in a different shape. Lundy looks at the forensic profile, the boat, the access to crime scenes, and calmly concludes that the killer is inside the building. We are going to remember that Dexter sits in those briefings, listening to a man who is, step by step, describing him. There is a small, easy-to-miss moment when Lundy watches Dexter a little too long after one of those meetings. No accusation, no confrontation, just a lingering look that says the numbers are not quite adding up. This time, Dexter does not push back the way he did with Doakes. He leans into the mask. He overshares about his foster father, offers to help, plays the eager analyst who is flattered by the legendary FBI agent. The lesson from Doakes is simple. Do not become the enemy of the investigator. Become his most useful tool. With Joey Quinn, the echo is messier, more emotional. Quinn is not a profiler. He is a Miami homicide detective who notices patterns the way most people do, half-consciously. Dexter shows up at crime scenes he should not be at. He reacts strangely to Rita's death. His connection to Lumen appears out of nowhere. When you lay them all out together, Quinn's questions almost form a complete picture. Almost, there's that scene where Quinn watches Dexter and Lumen on the docks, their body language all wrong for casual colleagues. For a second, Quinn looks the way Doakes used to look, like he is seeing through the surface. But instead of tailing Dexter relentlessly, he goes sideways. He hires Stan Liddy. He lets another man do the obsessive work that Doakes did himself, and Dexter has adapted. He does not simply outmaneuver Quinn with evidence, he uses relationships. He lets Deborah's growing bond with Quinn become a shield. He knows that if Quinn pushes too hard, he risks losing Deb, and that emotional cost is enough to blunt the investigation. Doakes taught Dexter that pure suspicion can be survived. Intertwined loyalties are more effective than any alibi. Others brush against the truth as well. Laguerta, circling back to the Bay Harbor butcher. Batista, briefly unsettled. Even Masuka, with his offhand comments about Dexter's lack of normal reactions. Each one has a moment where the mask slips in front of them, but none of them sustain it. No one else follows Dexter to the marina night after night or kicks in his door. Or looks him in the eye and says, without metaphor, "You're the one." This is the story of near misses instead of mortal threats, of suspicions that flare and fade instead of hardening into certainty. Doakes remains unique because he does not just suspect, he knows, and he pursues that knowledge until the series has no choice but to remove him. And as we move into Dexter's home life, that gap, the absence of a true Doakes, creates space for a different kind of hunter, one who does not wear a badge, to start closing in. And the series does something very quiet, right after Doakes is gone. It does not just remove Dexter's loudest accuser, it forces Morgan to look at the wreckage of that pursuit and realize that his old mask, the one that worked on almost everyone at Miami Metro Homicide, was not actually safe. Now, we are going to watch him rebuild it. Before Doakes, Dexter's day persona is almost minimalist. Polite, helpful, slightly odd. He smiles, brings donuts, offers clean, bloodless analysis, and then recedes. It is a mask built on absence, of anger, of strong opinions, of visible desire. Doakes is the proof that this emptiness reads as wrong to anyone who knows what real violence looks like. So after the cabin, after the Bay Harbor butcher case closes on the wrong man's body, you start to see Dexter add texture to the performance. He leans into visible emotion. He lets people see him rattled. With Rita, he does not just play the steady boyfriend anymore. He shows panic about being a father, anxiety about providing, flashes of jealousy. With Debra, he appears more openly protective, more wounded when she is hurt, more frustrated when she pushes him away. These are not random changes. They are the precise things Doakes never saw: fear, vulnerability, a man who can be knocked off balance. There are specific moments where the upgrade is obvious. When Rita struggles with addiction in later seasons, Dexter stages concern in ways that are almost theatrical, sitting up with her, voicing worry to friends, letting his work at Miami Metro visibly suffer. When Harrison is born, He does something the old Dexter would never do so loudly. He admits he is overwhelmed. He drops evidence, misses cues, asks for help. Each apparent mistake is a kind of insurance policy, a reminder to everyone around him that he is human enough to fail. And when you lay them all out together, these small performances form a thicker, more nuanced mask. It becomes harder for later characters to see what Doakes saw so quickly, because the blankness that once rang hollow is now filled with carefully chosen noise. Quinn's suspicions wobble. LaGuerta's revived Bay Harbor doubts take years to crystallize. Even Hannah, who meets Dexter closer to his true self, has to push through layers of learned softness to reach the predator underneath. But that leaves us with an uncomfortable question. Is this evolution genuine growth, or just more sophisticated camouflage? The series keeps that line deliberately blurred. This is the story of a man who may be learning to care, and also of a killer who has realized that caring is the safest possible disguise. Even as the mask improves, the shadow of Doakes lingers. Every time Dexter rehearses a reaction in his head before saying it out loud, you can feel that echo. One man, in a hallway at Miami Metro, looking straight through him. And as we move into his home life, that ghost will matter, because the next hunters do not come wearing badges at all. That ghost of Doakes follows Dexter into every quiet domestic scene, but there is a harder question sitting underneath it. In a series built around inviting you to care about a serial killer, could a man like James Doakes ever really be allowed to win? On paper, he should. He is the trained hunter. Special forces, sharp instincts, years at Miami Metro homicide. He reads people for a living, and when he looks at Morgan, he sees through the mask in a way no one else does. But that is not the whole story. Because the narrative itself is tilted, gently but relentlessly, toward Dexter's survival. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how the structure works. The show lives and dies on you staying inside Dexter's head, listening to his voiceover, feeling the tension of him almost getting caught and then slipping away. A character who looks at that fantasy and says, out loud, "You are a monster and I am going to stop you," is not just a threat to Dexter. He is a threat to the entire design of the series. So the conventions close in on Doakes. Every close call, every near miss, every time the mask almost comes off, the story finds a way to bend around him. His temper isolates him. His obsession looks unprofessional. Colleagues roll their eyes. The camera lingers on Dexter's wounded charm instead of Doakes' very reasonable suspicion. And you can feel the ground being pulled out from under him long before the cabin in the Everglades. Here is the pattern interrupt. If this were a different show, a more traditional police procedural, Doakes would be the protagonist, the man who senses what no one else can, pushed to the margins, slowly assembling the truth about a killer hiding in plain sight. We're going to sit with the discomfort that in this story, he is instead repositioned as an obstacle, something for Dexter to outmaneuver so the suspense can continue. And that is where the audience comes in. A lot of viewers admired Doakes, loved that he never bought the act, loved that someone in that building finally said what we were thinking. Others found him abrasive, loud, a disruption to the smooth, ironic rhythm of Dexter's narration. Many people felt both at once. You want him to catch Morgan, but you also want another season. That split reaction is part of why his fate feels so inevitable and so unfair at the same time. The story needs him to be right, or the tension evaporates. The story also needs him to lose, or the premise collapses. This is the story of a man who sees clearly and is punished for it, not because of plot logic alone, but because the show cannot survive him succeeding. As we move toward the revival, settle in, get comfortable, because that meta layer only deepens. When Dexter's world is revisited years later, the memory of Doakes hangs over every new hunter who appears, quietly changing how his role in the original seasons reads in hindsight. In Dexter New Blood, we're going to watch the same old pattern play out in a colder landscape. Different town, different name, same man. Dexter Morgan walks through the snow of Iron Lake the way he once walked through the humidity of Miami, presenting a quiet, helpful citizen named Jim Lindsay, while that familiar hum of violence sits just beneath the surface, waiting for the right pressure to bring it back. On paper, the revival's premise is simple. Dexter has exiled himself, traded Miami Metro homicide for a hunting store, and built a routine designed to keep the dark passenger on a leash. No kills, no slides, no boat. But that is not the whole story, because the series immediately shows you that this is still a man who stalks, who rehearses, who imagines the kill room in every empty space, even as he forces himself to walk away. And just like before, the world starts sending him Doakes-shaped problems. They are not carbon copies, but they occupy the same narrative space. People who look at Dexter and do not fully buy the mask. Angela Bishop, the local police chief and Dexter's girlfriend, is the most obvious echo. She is warm where Doakes is abrasive, but she is still a cop with instincts. When she notices Jim's odd gaps, the way he dodges questions about his past, you start to see that familiar tension return. Then there is Harrison, a son who feels the same darkness in himself and senses it radiating from his father. Where Doakes watched Dexter's body language at crime scenes, Harrison watches his emotional blanks at home. And Kurt Caldwell, the town's own killer, recognizes something predatory in Dexter long before either of them says it out loud. Every one of them circles the same truth from a different angle. When you lay them all out together, New Blood starts to feel like the cumulative weight of every near miss that came before. Doakes tailing Dexter's car, LaGuardia reopening the Bay Harbor butcher case, Deborah looking at him with dawning horror in later seasons. The revival treats those not as isolated scares, but as pressure building in a long, continuous story. Someone like Doakes was always going to reappear, because the pattern demands it. So when Angela finally connects Miami articles, missing person reports, and Dexter's lies, his arrest does not feel like a fresh investigation. It feels like paperwork catching up. His death at Harrison's hands lands the same way. This is the story of everything Doakes almost accomplished, finally pushing through. Delayed, but not denied. In a thematic sense, Doakes' early knowledge never really dies in that cabin. It migrates into Angela's case files, into Harrison's accusations, into institutions outside Miami that no longer have a reason to protect Dexter. And as we move into the final turns of the series, let's follow how that knowledge keeps resurfacing until there is nowhere left for him to run. So when that knowledge migrates out of the cabin and into the wider world, it forces us to look back at something simple and unsettling. Just how many times Dexter Morgan almost fell before he finally did. When you lay them all out together, the story of his survival stops feeling miraculous and starts feeling like a statistical error that kept refusing to correct itself. From the very beginning, the thin line is there. Doakes tailing Dexter through Miami, catching him alone at crime scenes, checking his rental cars and his boat, staring at him like a live grenade someone forgot to defuse. Every moment with Doakes is a near-exposure event stretched over 2 seasons, a slow, grinding test of whether Dexter's mask can withstand direct, unblinking suspicion from inside Miami Metro homicide. But Doakes is only the first wave. The ice truck killer case almost exposes Dexter through family. Brian leaves tableaux that speak directly to Morgan's childhood trauma. Deborah's early profile of the killer basically describes her brother, and a witness sketch could have drifted a few inches closer to his face. The danger is not just forensic, it is intimate. The closer Dexter gets to people, the more the line trembles. We are going to see that pattern repeat. Rita's ex-husband, Paul, correctly accuses Dexter of framing him, and Rita literally finds the shoe that proves it. She holds the truth in her hands and chooses not to follow it. Later, Cody almost walks in on Dexter disposing of evidence. Astor hears pieces of arguments that do not quite add up. Harrison absorbs far more than Dexter thinks. Again and again, it is not that there is no evidence. It is that love and denial step in to reinterpret it. On the professional side, the Bay Harbor butcher investigation paints a target directly over Dexter. The FBI profile calls out a forensically skilled insider with boat access. The algae trace leads straight toward his marina. Lundy, LaGuerta, and the entire task force circle closer, and Dexter survives only because of split-second improvisations, bad assumptions, and Leela burning down the one place that could have confirmed everything. This is the story of a man saved as much by other people's eagerness for closure as by his own planning. By the time we reach New Blood, the pattern is almost weary. Angela, Harrison, even random townspeople in Iron Lake catch glimpses of the same offness Doakes saw on day one. You start to see that every season adds more weight to the same fraying thread, more lies to track, more bodies to hide, more people who have seen too much. And at the center of that accumulation, Doakes stands as the original stress test, the first person to say out loud what the series spends years circling. Dexter's final collapse, viewed against this backdrop, feels less like a twist and more like paperwork finally catching up. Settle in, get comfortable, because as we move forward, we are going to follow those close calls in order and watch how one man's early certainty becomes the blueprint for everyone who comes after him. Settle in, get comfortable, because to understand why Doakes matters, we are going to look at the opposite force that kept Dexter safe for so long: denial. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, everyday version that lets people walk past danger as if it is office furniture. Denial, at its core, is a shield. Your mind edits reality so you do not have to feel certain things: terror, instability, the sense that the ground under your feet has never really been solid. Motivated reasoning is the more polite cousin of that same instinct. You start with what you want to be true, and then you collect only the evidence that supports it, ignoring every sharp edge that threatens the picture. When you lay them all out together, the reactions to Dexter Morgan inside Miami Metro homicide are a case study in both. Because think about what it would actually mean for those detectives, for those officers, to accept what Doakes is saying. If Dexter is what he looks like to Doakes, then a serial murderer has been walking into their squad room every morning, trading jokes, passing around donuts, consulting on their cases, and quietly outperforming them at understanding blood and death. It does not just make Miami look incompetent. It makes their entire sense of who the good guys are feel negotiable. So the mind does something very simple. It chooses the safer story. Dexter is odd, but brilliant. Awkward, but harmless. A little too into blood, sure, but that is why he is good at his job. Every moment that should raise suspicion gets refiled as a quirky detail of a trusted colleague. The late nights, the way he shows up at scenes before anyone calls him. The fact that his analysis so often seems perfectly tuned to the killer's mind, and Dexter helps them do it. His usefulness is a narcotic. He clears cases, makes bosses look competent, gives grieving families answers. He is reliable, calm, always there when the pressure spikes. Admitting he might be a monster would mean losing that asset, reopening old files, wondering how many times they shook the hand of the man they were hunting. The incentive to maintain the mask of innocence is enormous. Doakes comes from a different world. War, black ops, interrogation rooms, where assuming the best about someone could get you or your team killed. In that environment, you start from the worst case scenario and work backward. If someone feels wrong, you do not talk yourself out of it because they are charming or convenient. You lean in. That is why his mind will not participate in the quiet group agreement around Dexter. The same refusal that makes him dangerous to Morgan also makes him unwelcome inside his own institution. He breaks the spell everyone else needs in order to keep coming to work. And as we move into Dexter's closest calls, you start to see how long that spell holds and how violently it has to break before anyone else can finally see what Doakes saw on day one. So now, we move from the spell everyone else is under to the one man who refuses it. If you think of Doakes as irrationally fixated, you miss what is actually happening. A slow, disciplined case file being built in his head, one quiet moment at a time. We are going to sort that file the way a cop like Doakes would. First, the emotional anomalies. From the pilot, Doakes watches Dexter at scenes that should shake any normal person. A mutilated body, a grieving family, a room humming with horror. Everyone else at Miami Metro Homicide shows some version of strain or disgust. Dexter smiles. He looks a little too pleased to explain away as professional detachment. Doakes clocks that. The creepy comment is not an insult. It is an entry. Subject displays inappropriate affect. Then come the timing issues. Suspicious presence. Dexter appears early at scenes he should not know about yet, lingers late when his work is technically done. Drifts toward the worst violence as if drawn by gravity. Doakes' ex-Special Forces, he has spent seasons of his life watching men who like violence try to get close to it without seeming to. When you lay them all out together, those late nights at the office and those convenient arrivals stop looking like coincidence and start to look like pattern. Next is access to evidence. Dexter is not just any lab tech. He is the blood guy. The one person who can explain away strange stains, missing samples, irregularities in the chain of custody. When the Bay Harbor butcher case hits, Doakes is already suspicious of how comfortable Morgan is around blood. Now the FBI profile says, forensically skilled insider, access to crime scenes, probably a boat. Doakes does not suddenly wake up obsessed. He quietly connects those lines he has been drawing since day one. And then, finally, physical proof. The slides. By the time Doakes breaks into Dexter's apartment and finds that wooden box, he is not surprised by what is inside. He is confirmed. The neat grid of glass, each one a frozen moment of violence, preserved by someone who wanted to remember. To an ordinary cop, it is grotesque. To Doakes, it is exactly what his instincts predicted a predator like this would keep. This is the story of a gut feeling turning into an internal indictment. As a trained investigator, Doakes weighs each category differently, but they all lean in the same direction. Emotional coldness, suspicious timing, privileged access, and then trophies. By the time they reach the cabin, he does not need LaGuerta, the FBI, or a warrant. In his mind, the case against Dexter Morgan is already airtight. The cabin is just where he expects the mask to finally come off. So when Season 2 shows us a man who seems suddenly consumed by Dexter, what you start to see is not a new obsession, but the endgame of a methodical, private investigation. And the next time Dexter almost gets caught, that investigation is going to collide with everyone else's denial in a way that cannot be quietly ignored. Now, we move from the long build-up to the snap. Because for all of Doakes' growling and circling, there is a very specific moment where suspicion hardens into something colder, heavier, and irreversible. We are going to walk back through the candidates, because when you lay them all out together, you start to see just how carefully the series stages that shift. The first crime scene confrontation in the pilot is pure instinct. Doakes watches Dexter smile a little too easily around dismembered bodies, feels that emotional blank, and calls him creepy to his face. It is a cop's animal brain sounding the alarm, but it is not yet a case. There is no anchor point, only a feeling. Then there's the Everglades Trail in Season 2. Doakes follows Dexter out into the swamp, finds him near a remote cabin, and gets just enough of a glimpse to know Morgan is miles from any legitimate Miami Metro homicide duty. It is closer. Now the bad feeling has geography, secrecy, and timing. But Dexter slips away, and the Everglades remain circumstantial, a story Doakes cannot quite finish. The cabin confession is different again. By the time Dexter is chained up, Doakes has already seen the news, heard the words Bay Harbor Butcher, and watched the task force comb through evidence that seems to point away from his colleague. In that room, he gets confirmation, detail, motive, but notice, the confession comes after he has already risked everything. You only kidnap a fellow cop when you believe you are not wrong. The real hinge is the blood slides. When Doakes breaks into Dexter's apartment and opens that wooden box, the story changes. Those glass slides are not just trophies. They are the physical bridge between a vague predator and a specific killer. A seasoned cop lives in suspicion all the time. You file away odd behavior, you test alibis, you push and retreat. Certainty is rarer. Certainty is when you are willing to stake your badge, your freedom, even your life on what you know. That is what happens in that quiet, almost mundane moment at Dexter's place. The mask drops, not because Dexter is in the room, but because his system is. The private ritual Miami has never seen is suddenly sitting under Doakes' fingertips. From that point on, watch how his behavior shifts. He stops needling Dexter like an annoying colleague and starts moving like a hunter, tailing him relentlessly, confronting him in private, dragging him off-grid. Dexter is no longer a creep in the lab, he is an active target. Settle in, get comfortable with your own read here. Maybe, for you, the Everglades is where the line is crossed, or the cabin is where the story truly locks. The power of this arc is that it invites you to decide exactly when Doakes stops guessing and starts knowing, even as the series quietly stacks the evidence toward that small box of glass and blood. And once that box is open, every moment that follows carries a new kind of tension, because now it is not just about whether Dexter will be caught, but how far Doakes is willing to go to make sure he is. And once Doakes is gone, that tension doesn't dissolve, it mutates. Dexter has watched the one person who truly saw him die for being right, and from that point on. Every calculation he makes carries a new variable. Someone can, in fact, see through the mask. Before Doakes, Dexter's inner monologue in Miami Metro Homicide is almost playful. He jokes about passing as human, about donuts and small talk and blending in. After Doakes, you start to see a different kind of math running in the background. Whenever a colleague lingers a little too long, whenever someone asks a question that cuts a little too close, there is this flicker of remembered danger. He has lived through the worst-case scenario of being cornered by a cop with no illusions. He knows exactly how fast it can all collapse. This is the story of a ghost that isn't supernatural at all, but procedural. Even when the series moves past the Bay Harbor Butcher case, Doakes stays in the room. Other people's suspicions are quietly measured against his intensity. Quinn watching Dexter in Season 4, Masuka raising an eyebrow, Deborah following a hunch in later seasons, None of them feel as immediately lethal as Doakes did, and the series wants you to notice that. When you lay them all out together, every later suspicion looks like an echo with the volume turned down. The writing leans into this. LaGuerta's long memory of Bay Harbor, her refusal to fully accept Dexter's innocence, is framed as her picking up a thread that began with Doakes. Even in New Blood, when Angela Bishop starts aligning the patterns around Dexter Morgan, we are going to feel that familiar shape, a law enforcement professional who refuses to be charmed, who treats Dexter not as a quirky analyst, but as a potential suspect. Doakes is there in the template, even if his name is not. On a thematic level, he becomes a kind of haunting, not just for Dexter, but for the audience. Doakes represents the ever-present risk of being truly known, the proof that the fantasy of the perfect double life has a body count attached to it. Dexter's guilt about Doakes is rarely sentimental, but it is strategic and persistent. He knows that his choice to keep killing did not just endanger strangers, it consumed a colleague, a soldier, a man who was doing his job too well. That is why fan discussions keep circling back to him. When people ask whether Dexter got away with it, they almost always bring up Doakes as the moment he didn't. The show may have closed the file, but the discourse never did, treating Doakes as the moral verdict the legal system failed to deliver. In that sense, he is Dexter's first real consequence, the shadow that stretches all the way to Harrison and New Blood, where the question is no longer if someone will see Dexter clearly, but what they will do once they do. And that brings us to the next, quieter kind of close call, where the danger isn't a sergeant with a gun, but a sister with a slowly dawning realization. And this is where Doakes starts to linger in your mind long after the credits roll, because once you know how his story ends, every earlier scene with him stops feeling like background noise and starts feeling like a countdown that no one else can hear. Doakes is built out of contradictions that should not coexist, but somehow do. He is aggressive, volatile, and openly hostile to Dexter Morgan from the pilot. He snaps at him in the hallway, cuts through the small talk at Miami Metro Homicide, refuses the donuts and the easy charm. At the same time, his moral line is sharper than almost anyone else in the series. He will bend rules, but he will not bend on what he thinks is right, and that combination of blunt force, rigid integrity, and growing isolation is what makes him so hard to forget. Because as the seasons move on, you start to see how alone he really is. Colleagues joke about his temper, LaGuerta worries about his career, everyone else buys into Dexter's mask, and the more Doakes pushes, the more he looks like the problem. The show lets you watch a man who is essentially correct become socially radioactive for being correct too loudly. Fans felt that. When you lay them all out together, the reactions over the years form their own kind of case file. People say Doakes was done dirty. They argue he should have survived the cabin, that the Bay Harbor butcher reveal would have meant more if the one man who always knew had lived to see it. Entire rewatches are now structured around his scenes, with viewers tracking every glare, every clipped insult. Every time he steps into Dexter's space, like he's trying to force the truth out of the air. On a first watch, those moments can play as comic relief or simple tension. On a rewatch, they feel heavier. When Doakes calls Dexter a creep in the pilot, you can already see the cabin in the Everglades. When he catches Dexter alone at a crime scene, you can already hear the explosion Leela will set. This is the story of a man walking toward his own frame-up, and he never once changes direction. And underneath all of it is that central premise we're going to keep returning to. Doakes did not slowly figure Dexter out. He knew from day one, and the rest of his life becomes an attempt to prove what his instincts told him in their very first scene together. That is part of why viewers keep coming back to Dexter. Doakes' fate never feels fully resolved. Justice in this world tilts toward whoever controls the narrative, not whoever sees the truth. So settle in, get comfortable, because the closer we look at these near misses, the more we have to ask whether anyone in this series really gets the justice they deserve. So now, let's slow everything down and walk through the actual trail. Because when you lay them all out together, every single time Dexter Morgan almost gets exposed by Doakes forms one clean, unbroken line. It starts in the pilot with that first wordless glare. Miami Metro homicide is buzzing, everyone is charmed by Dexter, and Doakes just stares at him like he's looking at a crime scene. Nothing concrete happens there, but that is the seed, an emotional tell. Doakes reads the absence of normal feeling in Dexter's face and files it away. The first real test comes at that early crime scene with the dismembered body. Dexter is a little too fascinated. He lingers, he smiles, he lets the mask slip for a second. Doakes notices the excitement, moves in close, and calls him out. What saves Dexter is context and timing. Everyone assumes Doakes is just being abrasive, while the friendly blood guy gets the benefit of the doubt. Then we move to the nightclub confrontation. Dexter is stalking a potential victim, blending into the crowd, and suddenly Doakes is there again, shoving him, warning him off. The near exposure here is behavioral. Doakes spots a predator's focus in a place where a normal coworker would just be relaxing. Dexter escapes because there is no body yet, no physical evidence, only a feeling that no one else in the room shares. The dockside observation tightens the line. Dexter at his boat, late, secretive, and Doakes watching from a distance. By now, Doakes has connected the odd hours, the strange mood shifts, the way Dexter always seems to be one step ahead of the cases. What prevents exposure is simple. Doakes sees movement, not murder. He can track the boat, but he cannot yet prove what happens once it leaves Miami. Surveillance is the next escalation. We are going to see Doakes follow Dexter, break into his apartment, search his belongings. The near miss here is devastatingly close. Any wrong drawer, any hidden compartment discovered too early, and the story ends in season 2. Dexter survives through meticulous preparation and a little luck, his trophies still just out of reach. The Everglades pursuit is where instinct turns into open hunt. Doakes chases Dexter into the wilderness, sees the kill tools, hears enough to know this is not a misunderstanding. Only timing and geography save Dexter now, the isolation that lets him flip the situation and imprison Doakes instead. Then the blood slides. Doakes finally holds the physical link between Dexter and the Bay Harbor butcher, and at the cabin, he gets the confession, the full truth spoken aloud. The only thing preventing exposure is that no one else is there to hear it. This is the story of a noose tightening, one loop at a time. And as we follow that rope to its end, you start to see that the most dangerous near miss is not the one with the most evidence, but the one that comes next. So now, as the rope loosens a little, we can sit back and look at the whole pattern we have been tracing. From that very first episode, from the pilot onward, this is the story of one man in Miami Metro homicide who looked at Dexter Morgan and simply refused to look away. Everyone else saw the mask, the donuts, the easy smile, the helpful analyst who always had time to walk a detective through a blood pattern. But Doakes saw something else, right there in the pilot, before there was any Bay Harbor butcher, before there were blood slides in a cabin. He saw a man who was too calm, too empty, standing in rooms full of death, as if he were standing in line for coffee. Settle in, get comfortable with that thought for a moment, because when you lay them all out together, every strange glance, every confrontation at a crime scene, every time Doakes caught Dexter somewhere he should not quite have been, you start to see how little of this was guesswork. This was instinct, sharpened by years in special forces and then in Miami Metro. A lifetime of watching people lie with their faces while their bodies gave them away. Doakes could not be charmed. That is his defining trait and his fatal flaw. Where others at homicide were disarmed by Dexter's awkward politeness, Doakes treated it like another data point in a profile. The flat affect. The way Morgan never flinched at the worst crime scenes. The way he always seemed to be already there, or somehow the last to leave. Slowly, quietly, those details turned into a private case file in Doakes' head. Every close call added another thread. The odd blood slide habit he noticed in the lab. The late-night tailing that ended with Dexter on his boat, too far from shore, with no good explanation. The unspoken tension when Doakes stepped into a room and Dexter's posture shifted, just a fraction. Each moment on its own could be dismissed as workplace friction. Together, they formed a pattern that only Doakes was willing to trace all the way to its edge. And as that pattern clarified for him, it blurred for everyone else. The more certain Doakes became, the more isolated he looked. Colleagues rolled their eyes, superiors warned him off, friends chose the pleasant analyst over the abrasive sergeant. He was right too early, in a world that needed the myth of Dexter Morgan far more than it wanted the truth. So we are going to let the hard edges of the evidence soften a little now. Instead of dissecting each clue, we can feel the shape of the hunt itself. Long, tense, almost successful. A predator stalking another predator through the fluorescent corridors of Miami Metro, drawing closer with every season, and yet always, somehow, one step away from being believed. As you let those details drift to the background, what remains is a simple, lingering image. Doakes watching Dexter, knowing, and the question that hangs in the quiet after the chase, of what might have happened if someone had listened just a little sooner. So now, we're going to step back from the fluorescent corridors of Miami Metro and drift outside into the quiet. Picture Miami at night the way Dexter Morgan knows it best. The rush hour has burned itself out. The highways are mostly empty, long ribbons of concrete lit by spaced-out sodium lamps. The city humming in the distance, like something half asleep. Out here, the palm trees are just silhouettes. The neighborhoods he drives through are still. The pools covered, porch lights dimmed, curtains drawn. You can almost hear the soft hiss of the ocean underneath the low, constant murmur of distant traffic. It is the kind of night where nothing looks urgent, where everything feels like it can wait until morning. And yet, for Dexter, every night drive is a crossing. One life in the rearview mirror, another waiting at home. One set of tools wiped clean and stowed away, another set of baby bottles and laundry baskets waiting under Rita's soft domestic light. This is the story of a man who lives on a moving border, always balancing on that thin line between the body he just dropped into the bay and the smile he will put on as he walks through his front door. You start to see those roads differently when you lay them all out together. The route from Miami Metro homicide to the marina. The turnoff to a shipping yard. The quiet detour past a crime scene he should not be revisiting. Every moment he changes lanes, he is also changing masks, shifting from analyst to predator to boyfriend, and back again before the next red light. And somewhere on those same roads, close enough to taste the same salt in the air, there is another car. Doakes' car. Headlights cutting through the same darkness, following the same exits, just far enough back that Dexter only catches glimpses of him in the mirror. We know from the series that Doakes tails him, checks the boat, watches his patterns. In this wider, drifting view of Miami, he becomes the one pair of eyes that never fully closes, always half awake to the danger moving beside him. Think about how many times Dexter passes within inches of exposure. A late night return to the office, an extra stop at the marina, a trunk that stays closed just a few seconds too long when someone walks by. And in that narrow space between truth and denial, we often find Doakes, standing there, not with proof yet, but with certainty. So settle in, get comfortable with that feeling for a moment. The sense that the city is calm, the case files are stacked, the season has moved on, but something unresolved is still circling the block. Let's let the story settle not as a sequence of plot points, but as a mood, the quiet pressure of almost being seen and almost being caught, lingering over Miami like heat that never quite breaks. So if you are still here with us, in that quiet afterglow of the hunt cooling down, this is the part where the pace softens a little. Some of you are already halfway under, breathing slow, the images of Doakes and Dexter in the boatyard, or the cabin flickering and fading at the edges. Others of you are very much awake. You can feel every close call lined up in your head, every moment where the mask slipped and Doakes almost got a hand around it. You can see him in Miami Metro homicide, standing just a little too close, watching Morgan with that look that says, without words, I know what you are. If you are in that group, the ones who like to stay up a little too late, replaying a fictional detective sergeant's instincts, then settle in. Get comfortable with that. Because this is the story of people who do not look away when something feels wrong, and of viewers who do not either, when you lay them all out together. These scenes become less like isolated confrontations, and more like a long night shift, a watch that never really ends. We are going to keep that watch going on this channel, not with jump scares or rapid cuts, but with more long, quiet deep dives into characters who live on the edge of being exposed, into the thin line between the case file and the secret. If you want more nights like this, you can subscribe and, in a small way, join the Night Watch with us. Think of it less as following a channel and more as signing on for recurring duty. A little group of people who come back to Miami, to Metro, to the marina and the crime scenes long after the series finale. People who like to walk back through each season slowly to see where the line wavered. Where someone like Doakes felt the wrongness in Dexter Morgan before anyone else dared name it. If you are still awake enough to move your hands, you can tell us which Doakes, Dexter, almost caught moment lives rent free in your mind. Maybe it is the time he corners Dexter at a crime scene with that low, controlled fury. Maybe it is the blood slides in the car, or the way he says, I own you, with the certainty of a man whose instincts have finally been confirmed. If you feel like typing before sleep, the comments are there. And if you do not, that is fine. Whether you write anything or not, the story will still be here the next time you need it. The cabin will still be standing, the marina lights will still be on, the evidence will still be one step from being found. Whenever you come back, half awake and ready to drift, Dexter will still be almost caught, and Doakes will still be watching. So for a moment, we let the tempo slow down. We imagine a desk at Miami Metro Homicide, long after everyone has gone home, the fluorescent lights humming softly, the air conditioning still pushing that familiar stale chill through the empty room. On that desk, there is a single thick folder. The tab is overstuffed, the metal prongs bent from being opened and closed too many times. Someone has written a title across the front in black marker, a little crooked, a little impatient, Doakes versus Dexter. When you lay them all out together, every report, every surveillance note, every half-formed theory, you start to see what this really was. Not just a case, not just suspicion. This is the story of one man trying to put language to a feeling he had from day one. We're going to picture a hand on that folder now, smoothing the cover, feeling the weight of every near miss pressed between those cardboard panels. The night at the marina when Doakes was a few minutes too late. The confrontation at the station where he pushed too hard and everyone laughed it off as his temper. The blood slides he almost kept long enough to make them matter. Each page is a moment where the mask could have slipped for good and did not. Each page is a cost paid by someone, usually Doakes, so that Dexter Morgan could walk back into the lab like nothing happened. But when you close that file, gently, you notice something. The story does not really stay put. On a rewatch, every glare from Doakes, every time he says, "I see you," stretches out a little longer in your memory. A casual scene in season 1, a hallway argument, a look across a crime scene where Dexter is a little too calm, all of it carries more meaning once you know how the cabin ends, how the explosion sounds, how quickly everyone is willing to believe the neat version of events. The case is closed on screen. Doakes is gone, the paperwork is filed, the Bay Harbor butcher is solved, and yet the questions he raised do not file themselves away. They linger in the quiet after the credits. What justice looks like in a world where the most dangerous man in the room is the one classifying the blood. How perception can be punished when it cuts through charm. What it costs to see someone as they are and refuse to look away. So settle in, get comfortable, and if you ever drift back to the pilot, to that first day Dexter walks into Miami Metro, let's try something. Watch the way Doakes looks at him. Listen to the silence between their lines. Follow the small tells, the patterns. The way Dexter always seems to be alone with the dead, just a little longer than he should be. The file may be closed for now, but it will be waiting the next time you open the drawer. So now, settle in, get comfortable, and go back with us to that first day at Miami Metro Homicide. A crowded squad room, fluorescent lights, the usual hum of phones and printers. Everyone's smiling at Dexter Morgan as he walks in with that open, harmless face. Donuts, jokes, easy camaraderie, and just off to the side, one man not smiling at all. Doakes stands there, slightly apart, eyes narrowed, body angled like he is already taking cover. On your first watch, it plays almost like a personality gag. The gruff sergeant who just does not like the quirky blood guy. But when you lay them all out together, every later confrontation, every surveillance, every time he corners Dexter at a crime scene, you start to see that pilot image differently. It is not just dislike, it is recognition. This is the story of a hunter who spots his prey the instant it steps into frame. Doakes has spent a career in special forces and then in Miami, reading men who lie for a living, watching how violence sits in the body. So when everyone else sees Dexter's mask, Doakes sees the stillness underneath it, the way Morgan is always just a little too calm around the dead. That first look across the squad room is not a first impression. It is a silent decision. This one is dangerous. From that moment to the cabin in the Everglades, the line never really wavers. The background grudge in season 1 hardens into active tailing in season 2. The offhand, "you're creepy," becomes breaking into Dexter's apartment, finding the blood slides, forcing the truth into the open. If you rewind, there is a straight, unbroken thread from the man standing apart in the pilot to the man locked in that cage, still staring at Dexter like he has finally cornered the animal he has been tracking since day 1. And yet, within the world of the series, Doakes never gets the vindication that Look deserves. Officially, he dies as the Bay Harbor Butcher. His name attached to Dexter's work, his instincts written off as obsession. The file closes on him as a cautionary tale about going too far. But inside the logic of the story, he is the one who saw most clearly. He was right about Morgan when nobody wanted him to be. When we are going to remember Doakes now, it can be useful to shift him in our minds from obstacle to dark mirror. Not just the man trying to catch Dexter, but the man whose gaze keeps insisting that Dexter is, in fact, catchable, that he is not a ghost, not a perfect predator, just another killer standing in fluorescent light, pretending to belong. Let that final image linger for a moment. Doakes' eyes on Dexter in the squad room, on the dock, in the cabin. A single, unwavering line of suspicion cutting through every season, waiting for the day the rest of Miami Metro finally learns to see what he saw the second Dexter walked through the door. So now, as that last image of the squad room fades, we are going to let Miami itself grow quiet in your mind. The fluorescent lights of Metro homicide dim first, then the hallway, then the parking lot, until all that's left is the wider city, glowing softly against the water like a tired eye that has finally decided to close. You can almost feel the heat lifting off the pavement as the traffic thins and the sirens grow less frequent. The same streets where Dexter Morgan stalked his targets, the same docks where Doakes watched him disappear into the dark, are still there. But they are no longer demanding your attention. For tonight, they are just lines of light along the causeway, slowly flickering out as if the whole place is exhaling after a very long, haunted watch. Every close call we have traced, every moment the mask almost split, starts to loosen its grip when you lay them all out together like this. The cabins and crime scenes, the blood slides and confrontations, step back into the larger story of a city that has seen more than its share of violence and still manages to sleep. This is the story of tension slowly uncoiling, of a hunt that pauses even if it never truly ends. Let's allow those near misses to dissolve a little. Doakes on the marina, catching sight of Dexter's boat. Doakes in the lab, noticing one more odd habit, one more late night. Doakes in the cabin, finally saying out loud what he has always known. Each of those scenes had sharp edges when we were inside them. Now they can soften at the margins, like headlines from an old season you remember, but do not need to relive in detail. There will always be unanswered questions. What if he had lived? What if Miami Metro had listened sooner? What if one more piece of evidence had survived the fire? You do not have to solve any of that right now. You can let those questions drift just beyond reach, like boats rocking gently out on the bay, knowing you can come back to them another night, in another late listen, when you feel like walking these lines again. What matters, quietly, is the thing we have returned to over and over. Doakes knew from day one. That first look in the pilot, that instant recognition of something wrong behind Dexter's smile, is now part of how we carry the series with us. When you think of Morgan at Miami Metro, you start to see that unwavering gaze in the background. A reminder that the story was never only about a perfect predator hiding in plain sight, but about the one man who refused to look away. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the language stretch out between you and all of that. The murders, the suspicion, the confessions recede into a softer distance, like city lights seen from far offshore. They are still there, but they do not have to be close. Not while Miami sleeps, not while you do, and as they do. This is the part where we quietly remind you what kind of place you have wandered into. This channel is not really about jump scares or twist endings. It is about long, measured walks through stories where people almost get caught. Every close call, every near miss, every time the mask almost came off, we are going to slow it down and hold it up to the light, until you start to see how fragile that mask was from the very beginning. Tonight, it was Doakes and Dexter. Miami Metro homicide by day, a kill room by night. A soldier who could read a predator in a single glance, and a predator who built his entire life around not being read at all. But this is the story of a pattern, not just one pairing. And when you lay them all out together across the series, you start to see the same shapes repeating in different faces. Somewhere down the line, we may follow Lagerda's quiet, stubborn suspicion as it survives office politics and closed cases. We may sit with Deborah as love and horror collide in that final season, watching every moment where she almost says the one thing she cannot unsay. Or we may step outside Dexter entirely, into other shows where suspicion and denial share the same room, and everyone politely agrees not to name what they already know. For now, you do not have to decide. You can just let this be one more slow descent into a familiar, dangerous world that you can leave whenever you like. When you feel like coming back, you will know where to find us. Settle in, get comfortable, or drift in halfway through some other investigation. We will still be here, tracing the same thin line between what people see and what they let themselves believe. If you are still listening clearly, thank you for keeping watch with us this long. If you are only catching fragments in that hazy place between waking and sleep, that counts too. The part of you that stayed awake for Doakes, that kept an eye on Morgan even when everyone else looked away, is doing its job. So let's leave the lights low and the questions open. Because somewhere, in some story, another Doakes is already staring at another Dexter across a crowded room, feeling that same cold recognition settle in. And when their paths begin to cross, when the looks turn into evidence and the evidence turns into danger, we will be there to follow every glance, every pause, every almost confession, right up to the next close call.